Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report, a little special edition. Our review, analysis, and predictions in light of the recent presidential debates, which were, let's just say, quite an interesting little show. I watched it two times over because I watched one stream and then I had some friends that wanted to watch it too, so I watched it a second time over. So that was within almost like back to back. So hopefully I got a lot out of that. Hopefully I know what I'm talking about here because I was actually underwhelmed by it. I expected a lot more. But for starters, I will just go over the election polling from Real Politics, the aggregate they have today. So, national average has Biden at 49.7, Trump at 43.1. That has Biden, of course, by 6.6. Top battlegrounds has it at Biden with 48.6 and Trump with 41.5, so it's a bit closer. And the betting odds still favor Biden with a 59.9. Now, the Electoral
Yeah,
College predictions with no toss-up states show Biden at 353 and Trump at 185. I think, again, still a bit too premature to say that, but with the American electoral system, I believe it's important to say the battleground states, which we have right here. Florida, Trump down by one, Biden up by one. Pennsylvania, Biden up by 5.7. Biden up by 5.2 in Michigan. Wisconsin, Biden is up by 5.5. North Carolina, Biden is up by half a percent. And Arizona, Biden is up by 2.8%. But again, we'll have to see how that pans out over the next two debates. Now, over the course of this debate, Biden, I would say, didn't necessarily win the debate, but he won in a certain way, considering the fact he did not have a moment of extreme anger or belligerence, and he sounded semi coherent throughout most of it. So he had his moments. There were a few gaffes he made, but again, that's regular Joe Biden. He was like that even at the peak of his political career. So while I'm not going to declare it a Biden victory in this debate, he definitely came away showing the American people he isn't necessarily this defunctly senile old man that he's been portrayed by the right as for the past several months. Because, again, he's been rather reclusive with his campaigning, doing very sparse interviews, very sparse campaign rallies. That was actually a topic, something that got brought up in the debate last night, Trump and Biden going back and forth about that. But ultimately, he came out of it looking good because of that. I wouldn't say Trump came out looking bad. Trump definitely had his moment. Honestly, it felt like this is the common take. Trump was debating with the moderator Chris Wallace. It did seem like that at times, but it also did other times seem like a Trump rally where he was just going onto the red meat of the base and acting like he was campaigning rather than debating.
yeah. I think the moment that everybody thought would come, and this is basically why Trump was um, hanging on to him, basically, interrupting him, was he was hoping that he would mess up. And basically, what this proved is that for the last 6 months, Biden has been pretending to be senile. But in but in all
I mean,
seriousness,
it wouldn't be the craziest thing a politician has done in this country, and that would be something, or either that, or I don't know what crazy super drugs the CIA has for him, because that definitely was not Adderall, because he would have been way more belligerent. Based on what I know, I'm not a pharmacist, I'm not a medical professional, but just my
yeah.
outside knowledge of how that medication works, he would have been way more belligerent if that were the case.
Yeah, so exactly. Stranger things have happened, but he kept his composure. He was relatively coherent. There were moments where he really made Trump look like, or pointed to, when Trump really was just being belligerent. Now, if you were watching this and you expected to hear some erudite political debate for America's latest problems, you were in for a surprise. But it shouldn't be a surprise because, judging by the circus that is American politics, especially I would say the last 5 years, even further, but especially the last 5 years, uh, you're being wildly optimistic. So yeah, Biden never cracked. Now, you could look at it as a kind of victory for Trump as well, especially when you consider uh, a lot of a lot of the posting that was going on late last night and today, basically calling for not another debate. Now, I don't know if that was something that the Republicans wanted. I somehow doubt that, because I think that would serve them better. Let's put it that way.
Because I think the
Because again,
Republicans, just to continue on that point, got really lucky last night that Biden didn't have a moment of senile belligerence.
yes. So, but the Democrats, I think, are happy not to risk a second debate, and they do have uh, a respectable reason why not to have a second debate. Um, they can take the high road here, and they can win with it. So, does that mean that there's going to be a second debate? I don't know. I I don't think so. Um, and I don't think that the American public will care either. But there's a lot to unpack. Especially, there were moments where Trump actually prevailed very well. A lot of bad faith questions were asked over and over and over again. Seville was brought up, and especially that moment where he was asked if he would denounce white supremacy. And everybody know by now, it's famous, his line about the Proud Boys, by saying stand down,
Stand down, stand by.
back. Yeah, stand down, stand by. I mean, that has driven them insane, right? And so it's good that he basically exposed it for the chimera that it is. That it's just, I mean, it really is a leftist fantasy at this point. No one really, unless they're very politically partisan, believes in the summer of 2020 and now moving into the fall of 2020, that the biggest destructive force in America, in American civil society, are white supremacists. Like, it's the looting, the burning, the murder, the murders that have been happening.
Which are all done by white
You know,
supremacists in blackface, okay? Let's just put that out there.
yeah, that's
That's
right.
that's
So
what
of
we were
course,
told, and that's why I believe it. Because
Chad
I trust our.
Seattle was never brought up. There was that photographer that was killed. I fail to remember. He was killed by a mulatto guy, and they were both basically BLM supporters. And he just shot the gun into the crowd, and he killed this guy, this young man. There's also the case of the young woman who was shot and killed. She was actually pursued and shot and killed for saying all lives matter instead of Black Lives Matter. So there's lots of these instances. The first night of arsons that took place in Minneapolis, the black antique owner who was burned alive in his shop. It's just,
The old
there
black police
were a few
officer
cops
who
that were
got
killed.
killed on the alarm going off in one of the stores. That was when his widow was one of the main speakers at the RNC, or they had like one of her like virtual calls and her what's David Dorn?
Are
Is
you
that
talking about Dorner?
yeah, that's who I was thinking.
Yeah. And there was a cop in Oakland that was killed. Or actually, a cop and a security guard. Um, and on Telegram, I remember seeing the video of the guy who shot the security guard. He was lured to this van, and the guy shot through the van window. And anyways, he killed him. So I remember it was over a month before that was confirmed. So anyhow, anyone who's seen the protests does not think that white supremacy is the most dangerous element in American domestic affairs. And Trump was wise to point that out. He also pointed out that one of his supporters was murdered in cold blood on the streets of Portland, right? And let's be honest. I mean, Biden, in a way, did denounce the violence, but he did not specifically denounce Antifa or BLM, which he never will. Um, So you could say that in some respects, we have never seen Trump, uh, abide by supporting some of his supporters. He certainly didn't do it after Charlotte. Well, he didn't really do it. I'm very sure when he called out who were the bad people on both sides, he did not think Richard Spencer was one of the good guys. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, honestly, the Fox News version, which again probably what Trump got was it was probably just a bunch of good old Southern boys, part of those Confederate societies. My great grandfather fought in the Civil War on the for the South, etc. He thought it was like a bunch of the for lack of a better term, the old rednecks versus sort of the dumb liberal college kids. He didn't make a, I mean, like yeah, he called out Antifa and stuff. He technically condemned the Nazis and white supremacists or whatever. I can't believe
And
I'm
the
rehashing
eh,
Charlottesville again. But pretty much when he said, yeah, there's good people on both sides, he's pretty much saying the Spurs on both sides didn't define the event. But honestly, at this point, he should have just said there are morons on both sides. He should have said, okay, like who are these people? Why is this happening? Like honestly, in retrospect, maybe it would have been better if he took that approach. Now, of course, they would have twisted that any which way because it is Donald Trump. It is
yes,
the left wing media versus Donald Trump, and anything he would say would be twisted like that. But I don't know. Maybe that might have played better, or maybe I personally would have enjoyed it more. Who knows?
right. And then Biden referencing the FBI and the conclusions of the FBI. Is there really a Trump supporter that believes the FBI anymore? I strongly doubt that.
Oh no, I mean,
I
most
feel
people
as if,
don't. Even the like, pretty much
yeah.
only the very partisan, like hardcore Democrats who are still spurned about Hillary Clinton losing. I mean, because the more left winger on the FBI, like left wingers aren't going to support the FBI now. They'll conveniently trot out their claims every once in a while, similar to how the right wing will bring up FBI crime statistics. Like, I mean, they'll pick and choose. I mean, I think the crime statistics are obviously a bit more true than the white supremacist terrorist argument, but again, that's. But aside from the very partisan Democrats and the principled true conservatives like the Lincoln Project Republicans, nobody trusts the FBI, nobody trusts the NSA, nobody trusts the CIA. They their reputation, what little of it was left, was completely decimated after 2016 onward.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that was interesting, I don't mean to harp on too long about this, but they brought up the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys are supposed to be this. I mean, literally, there are people unironically who call them neo-Nazi, fascist, white. Like, I mean, to say, I mean, it's ridiculous because anybody who's seen the videos, of course, knows they're not all white, and they never have been all white. Number two, I think they were waiting, of course, for some really bad things to happen this weekend past, and they didn't happen. So they didn't change their strategy. They decided that they were going to use the Proud Boys thing, and the fact is, some of the protests between Proud Boys and Antifa in Portland are anticlimactic, and this was one of them. And so it's going to be hard to convince a lot of people who are left on the fence, and there's not too many of those, about the Proud Boys. And, on Twitter, there's small accounts that are happy to show you who the actual leader of Proud Boys are. Of course, they'll be called Uncle Toms and so on and so on. But it isn't the group people think it is. And I mean, let's face it. Obviously, what we've learned the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years is that the neoliberal establishment views white people as a potential danger to its development, and that's why anything that's even remotely, let's say, majority white is able to be framed as a white nationalist or white supremacist group,
Oh yeah,
right?
it's been like that, but I do think the biggest takeaway we can make from the white supremacy argument, the Proud Boys, their demographic makeup, is that the alt right truly is a Latinx movement. Which brings me to my next point. that apparently watchers of the Spanish language debates
Yeah,
favored Trump in a two-thirds majority. People
yeah,
who watched the
66 to 34.
yeah 62 to 38 was it?
No, 66 to 34.
Wow.
I
Okay,
was
so
shocked.
yeah, it's the hard two-thirds. Now I am shocked, and I'm also not shocked because it is a very interesting dynamic with Hispanics, with the time in which they came in this country, with the rate of assimilation. Because an assimilated Hispanic, an assimilated any immigrant that's come in since 1965, is somebody who has given up their identity completely and conformed to the amorphous culture, so are going to be more liberal, more left wing, more Democrat. But also, you have the economic elements, the arguments which a lot of the non-integrated Hispanics will still vote Democrat because they work as manual laborers, and I mean, again, there's still some interest in there depending on who you talk about. Also, of course, welfare benefits and other social security nets they're more likely to be dependent on. But again, you also hit that weird balance where some of them will be way harder to the right because they do come from a very conservative culture, at least on paper, and you could say very traditional society in that same vein. So I was simultaneously surprised and not surprised. Again, especially considering the fact that the Spanish language one, I doubt it's the people who identify as Latinx or are the fully assimilated second, third generation Hispanics we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Um, who knows? I mean, are we witnessing the vindication of Ronald Reagan? I mean, honestly, I think if the George Floyd riots had not happened, I don't think this would. I don't think we would have seen the figures that we saw. Uh, I think that basically, the BLM protests are a sign of danger for a lot of Hispanics.
Oh yeah, because
I'm going.
the pivot to the black community, it's completely defined the coalition of diversity. Like there was a Spanish language pro Trump ad saying, "Well, Biden's so concerned about representing the demographics of the country, yet he picks a black woman as running mate," and they listed all these statistics like, "Look at how many more Hispanics there are. Look how much more they contribute to the economy, to this and that." So there was some division sowed by the fact that the Democrats went from broad diversity to all out Black Lives Matter, what's good for the black community, etc., etc., etc. And not to mention, a lot of the riots did target a lot of Hispanic communities. Now, those were shut down by the residents communities, especially considering the kind of Hispanic communities they went into. It did not end well, but continue.
Yeah. So this pivot that happened in a way could turn out to be a very bad idea. Because let's face it, we're kind of witnessing an American social decline. It's a lot of bread and circus. We've commented this in passing on our other shows, and what we're seeing is various ethnicities basically, fighting one another, sometimes teaming up with one another, to basically get at, the riches that like America can offer. And I think Hispanics were on a timeline where they believed that they would inherit the most, and not to forget that the Democrat de- debates amongst all the candidates. We saw nights where everybody was speaking whatever amount of Spanish they knew, right? So there was a lot of catering, a lot of ethnic catering to Hispanics, and then that just kind of evaporated with Floyd. And I'm very sure that, of course, BLM is of course financially tied up with the DNC. So I mean, no surprise. So I would think that the strategy was that this would benefit both groups, but in fact, it hasn't, um, and it remains to be seen what will happen. I've already seen you know. Uh, some worrisome developments for the DNC. You can uh, see that there's a kind of re-strategizing to re-include them, and almost right on cue, just before the debates, we saw Trump with this platinum plan. What is it? Is it something like $500 billion
Yeah, half a
over the
trillion
next
up there, and
$500 billion, $500 billion to uh, for African American businesses, right? It's uh, and this is what we mean. Like, everyone's going to have to foot the bill for that, but it's targeted to this or that group, and it's ruled by minorities in some respect. And that's kind of a blueprint for just about any place that America has extreme power over. So,
yeah,
and of course, I also mean Zogd America, not just Anglo America, but they it does serve their purposes.
yeah, and this entire phenomenon has taken hold in the Anglosphere because you see this in Canada, you see this in the UK, you see this in Australia, New Zealand, pretty much anywhere that was at one point majority Anglo or founded by the British, the English, etc., has fallen victim to this sort of political paradigm. And there's many reasons for that, but you also see it in the non-Anglosphere, especially in Western Europe. It grows with the. I mean, there were several George Floyd protests all across Western Europe. That the place you'd expect, Germany, less so France, believe it or not, but Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Scandinavia, etc. Now,
Yeah.
like I said, that's not a surprise. But one thing I think that really stands out concerning the Hispanic question is that 2016 was based around Trump hates Mexicans. Trump hates Hispanics. He said they're all criminal lowlives and coming over here to steal our jobs and commit crime, whatever. And that's why he wants to build the wall. Speaking of which, I haven't heard Trump talk about the wall in quite some time. But that's beside the point. And now it's completely pivoted. Like you said, they were trying in the debates of 2019 in the lead up to this in the primaries. They were all speaking Spanish. Julian Castro was the next biggest thing. I who was it? It was Beto, who has the fake Hispanic name, who tried to do like the Peggy Hill Spanish, and
Yeah.
you had all of that. But like I said, from late May onwards, it's been all Black Lives Matter, racial justice, the history of black people in this country, and one of the other major topics of the debate, one that has caught up a lot of attention, is the question on the racial education, which got called racial sensitivity, what a lot of people in our sphere call critical race theory, the point where it's and Trump comes out and denounced it, saying, "Oh, they're teaching people to hate this country." Which, again, if you want to read more into that, oh, it's teaching them to hate white Americans rather than Americans. But the debate centered on that and talking about Trump, quote unquote, ending it. Now, of course, that order has been completely ignored and stifled at every turn, whether that be at the CDC, whether that be at the Pentagon, any other government agencies. They're continuing on with their training programs. But I thought that was a particular moment of interest because neither, like, everyone generally knows what it is and everyone has their opinion on it, but it didn't seem like either of them could really give a solid definition of what it was. And I think, again, that is by design supposed to be this amorphous thing they can use as bludgeon.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. Like a lot of things in a democracy, a lot of it has to be covert. It has to look like one thing for the average person and be another. It, you know, it's just it's just something. It's a feature of the society that just permeates everything.
Yeah, and like I said, it pretty much, again, I saw a lot of takes which aren't uncommon for this sphere that, well, this proves that democracy is a failed ideology. Look at what we just experienced. And all things considered, I don't think it was even hectic or as chaotic as even some of the 2016 debates. Honestly, like I said, I felt very underwhelmed going into this. I thought this was going to be a massive, massive crapshoot thing. Everything that could have gone wrong would go wrong, and that it would have ended in a screaming match, but it didn't, like I said. And I thought that was largely contingent. Trump tried to bait him into this on Biden. Now, I've also seen this take, and this has been another point of contention among our sphere. How do you think Chris Wallace did with moderation? I thought I don't know, it seemed like every time, at least to me, now I do think he was slightly biased towards Biden. I don't think it was absolutely overt. I don't think it was as much as a lot of people are painting it as. But it did seem like, this is just a point that I found particularly funny, that every time he addressed Trump, he did it as like a sniveling child, like he feared him. Like, oh, okay, Mr. President, let me ask you the next question. Like, just a tone of like fear and terror in his voice that he had to talk to Trump.
Yeah, I did notice that. But I think I can also explain where, this idea that Wallace was unduly on the side of Biden more than Trump. I think Wallace was annoyed by Trump trying to stump Biden by constantly interrupting him. And the fact of the matter is that if we're going to be honest, he did interrupt Biden all the time. And when it came for Trump to have to counter a point and the time was out, well, to some degree, Trump was responsible for that. Trump played it well, like he was the martyr in the whole thing. But I think Wallace was agitated by it. I think Wallace overall handled it fairly well. If there's another debate and it's somebody from MSNBC or CNN, you're going to see a big difference. You better hope it's not Anderson Cooper or name another
Maddow, oh boy, that'd be a good
Maddow.
one.
I mean, Maddow would be even worse. Uh, we all know where this would go. So now I'm not trying to, um, tell people to adopt a defeatist position in all of this. It is what it is. No, none of us like this. The kind of system that we're in. I get it, but if we're going to be completely honest, I think at first, I think that Wallace was acting in good faith, and I think he began to get tired of Trump constantly interrupting him. It was a strategy. Trump wanted to do it in order to trip Biden up, to distract them. He was hoping for that moment where he would no longer be cogent and he would be, drifting off and talking about something else. He'd become tongue tied. Everybody has seen these videos, and it didn't happen. And I think Wallace was onto that. And I think if we're really going to be fair, and that doesn't mean adopt a position of like losing. The fact is, Trump did do that.
Yeah, he did do that, and like you said, it was an explicit strategy. And the other thing which did kind of happen, people joked that Trump was debating with Chris Wallace, but like you said, I can only imagine what him versus Anderson Cooper, any CNN talking head, anyone from MSNBC, especially considering, um, especially when you look at Maddow, somebody who has this visceral reaction to Trump. Now, of course, they're never going to do a Tucker host debate because that, like, as much as I'd love to see that, I know it ain't happening. But
Hmm.
it just seemed like
Yeah.
more of a formality that we didn't really get a debate at all. Like, because what usually happens is, and again, not that it's been a pure or genuine democratic system, if even at all, but the moderator asks the candidates the questions, let the candidates cross-examine each other, and then puts it to an end. But it seems like it's honestly just become more of both spectacle and a formality at this point. We have to put these two old geezers up on stage to yell about their talking points for a few hours because that's the way we've always done it, isn't it? We have to have the debate. Why wouldn't we? And I am starting to see the point of view why people might just say screw it and not have a second or a third debate. And I, especially with the way they delineate the topics, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have a second or third debate because under a more quote unquote normal election, the debates were focused on various different subjects. They were broken up pretty evenly between Trump and Clinton. But this time it seems like they covered all the issues people cared about. Like, What, are you going to put him up on stage and have him talk about Afghanistan and Syria and tax policy next debate? Those issues don't resonate the way they did in 2016. And hell, the only reason the foreign policy issue really resonated last election is
Mhm.
because Hillary went off the deep end and said, we have to intervene in Syria. We have to put an end to this bloodshed in Aleppo. That was the big talking point throughout the 2016 election. But nobody cares about what's going on abroad right now because there are so many things going on at home. And nobody's going to care about these technical policies, about taxes, about any of these other things. They want to hear about the cultural issues. This election ultimately comes down to cultural issues, which is why I was that and COVID, which is kind of a cultural issue at this point, which is why I was so surprised that they dedicated so little time to the Supreme Court debate.
Right. Although there was that one moment where Trump asked Biden if he was going to increase the number of justices sitting on the Supreme Court. Biden's refusal to answer basically means, "You're damn right, I will." Um, so I think the Democrats know that they're going to the Republicans, and again, we've gone over this. It's not going to make a difference, guys. The no big issue is going to be turned around. There is no way to like really culturally change the direction that this train is on. Okay. But I don't know. Maybe it's going to slow it down a little bit, but it's very look how much the cultural war has accelerated towards the left just in 4 years, right? Uh, so, yeah, I mean, it's an important. That was a telling moment, but as you say, not much time was spent on it, and I think you also brought up a great point. People don't care about foreign policies right now. They can't. They simply can't afford to. I mean, America literally is burning right now. There is if you thought there was a cultural war 4 years ago, it's far worse than that now. And whoever was responsible for the questions, that was a good strategy. If not bringing up foreign policy was a decision, that was a good decision. Pardon me. Yeah, so I thought that was a good point that you brought up.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't see unless Trump wants to champion, we're getting out of Afghanistan, we're holding Iran to account, and Biden wants to sit there and squawk about the Iran deal, and Trump is siding with dictators over democracy. Like, it would be a very stale debate that would not engulf the public. I mean, this one hardly did. A lot of people explicitly went into this knowing that it was going to be not a debate that where they decided that who they want to be president. They went in for it to see like what are these two crazy old men going to yell at each other tonight. And
Yeah,
when you put
and
it
actually, go ahead. Go ahead.
when you put it at that level, and then you add more substantive issues beyond the current cultural issues going on right now, that isn't going to draw in anyone at all. Like I said, nobody wants to hear. I mean, again, the war in Afghanistan does still carry a lot of weight for a lot of people, especially with people who are in the military, that have family in the military. But and I mean, hell, for this show, I mean, look at the name of the show, look at the topics we cover. But for a lot of Americans at this point, with the lowest number of troops we have in Afghanistan since I don't know, like since the beginning of the war, the issue doesn't strike the same chord. Syria doesn't strike the same chord. Talking about the Kurds doesn't strike the same chord. None of that does.
Right, and I mean, I could but we could develop this further. One could say that one of the reasons perhaps foreign policy wasn't broached was because there are a few instances where Trump has had some victories. They would certainly be framed as victories. Uh, let's say with regards to the incredible and the incredibly beautiful peace deal, the Israeli peace deal. Like,
Or the embassy,
that,
or he met with Kim Jong Un once, even though nothing really came of that meeting. Just the photo op
yeah,
alone is enough to say that, oh, Trump's really out
yeah,
there changing the world, and I mean,
Yeah,
especially to a large segment of the American public, say he can also play the tough on Iran thing because a lot of Americans, when Obama made the deal, thought we
exactly.
shouldn't be negotiating with the Iranians because, again, there is the long storied history, especially among the boomers who are the main voters for Trump. I would say probably the bulk of his voters. They still have a very adversarial view of Iran that they still think it's the 1970s, 1980s.
Right. So those would have been the two feathers in his cap, as it were. But the rest of the stuff, North Korea, China, even Syria. Syria is not a victory. Viewed from the left, why is Assad still there? Viewed from the right, why are our troops still there? Then there's the question of Russia. Um, of course, it will seem that he's too soft on Russia by the left, and by the right, it'll be just disengagement. Like, why even bring it up?
Yeah, and I
They're
mean,
frankly, everybody's tired of hearing about Russia. So
it is funny because
if there is
Biden did
a
trot out
debate
the
like
Russian bounties at some point. Like that
he
that was
did, that was ridiculous. That was ridiculous.
I think even the
With a,
mainstream media outright said, like I think New York Times, Washington Post outright said, "Oh yeah, that didn't happen."
that's right. That's right. That was only a few weeks ago. Um, that was a cheap shot by Biden. This kind of rad lib patriotism rings false because it simply was never there until Trump got elected. It's just a counter position. That's all it is. But one other thing I want to talk about with the debate is the question of the global perception of this debate. And I think for people, depending on whatever other country you might be living in, and you witnessed this debate, I don't think anybody came away impressed or that America isn't on a decline or isn't um, dysfunctional. That I think is obvious. The last debate was like that. This debate is like that. But as you pointed out, this debate doesn't have some of that excitement, you know. And I think that one of the things that you can tell with like the left elite establishment, and they are the ones that are ostensibly in control of the country. Let's be honest about that. They are worried that these debates are not sowing confidence in American allies, particularly with regards to NATO and the EU. And it will embolden, because there'll be humor pieces, I'm very sure, in places like Iran, Russia, and China, right? Last night's
Even
debate,
in France and Germany, I mean, some of those, I
yeah,
think, what is that left wing newspaper, Der Spiegel? They go hard on American politics all the time.
right, and it looks like weakness, you know. It does not. It's even more difficult to find partisanship other than Trump was a loudmouth, which everybody already knows, and he kept cutting Biden off. But despite that, um, the larger takeaway, the more important aspect of last night was that it showed an incredible amount of dysfunction because ultimately it's these two old guys and um, that seemed like at each other's throats and just not a good look.
I mean, like you said, I don't see how anyone came away feeling confidence in American sole global leadership because we brought it up yesterday, but there were, I think what was it, the Rand whatever, where they had these maps of these countries, whether they wanted to, whether they
Yeah.
anticipated them increasing security ties with America or not. I'll see if I can pull those up real quick if you just want to give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're right. That's interesting as well. I think my big takeaway from that is how committed Germany and France are to move away from military ties with America, and how interested they are in an independent course. Uh, I don't think Trump played a small part. I think he played a rather large part in that. Um, you could go back even further and say that the results of the 2014 Ukrainian coup and Russia's involvement in Syria, in a way, were already signs indicating that America was not what it was 10 years prior. And it could not commit itself the same way that it could before, nor could it intimidate other countries as effectively as it once did. Granted, Russia is a nuclear power. It's on the five. It's one of the five permanent members of the UN, and so on. I understand that, but and that not for America means there has to be a very subtle way they eventually conquer Russia. It has to happen in a very subtle way, where Russia doesn't leave the five permanent members, but ostensibly it becomes a satellite. So um, this commitment by Germany and France seems to be implying something else that is not completely related uh, to Trump, no matter what role he's played the last 4 years. And then the Eastern European partners, they're interested, not all across the board, but some of the Eastern European countries are interested in stronger ties if Trump is elected. I think a lot of that comes because from the fact that they know Trump uh, will basically honor their commitments and make more deals. And I don't think they have that sense that Biden will offer the same thing. With countries like Poland, I think Poland is actually afraid of Biden getting elected because not that Trump isn't pushing, the global homo agenda. He is, of course, but Biden would more openly do it. And what's different is that the media would proclaim it. Notice when Trump does it, nothing's proclaimed about it. You kind of have to dig deep to find that, right? Liberals are not interested if Trump is carrying water for them. He's that reprehensible. He's literally that reprehensible to them. If
Okay, I
Biden
got
does
the
it,
map, so
however,
I'm just gonna go ahead
it'll
and
be very magnified.
pull them up right now. Just to,
What's that?
I got the map, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pull them up right now to give a little bit of
Sure.
perspective to what you're saying. So, yeah, but you were saying that Germany and France have long-term plans of disengagement otherwise, and this covers specifically NATO, I believe. And here
Yeah.
is the one that covers. Oh boy, that is blurry. But that is if Trump is not reelected here on the left, and dark blue is strengthen, light blue is maintain, purple is maintain good relations but disengage, and dark purple, which is not any on this map, would mean move more towards an explicitly pro-Chinese policy. And
Mm.
uh, let me pull up this other one right here. So, and we will get that right here. And yeah, I didn't anticipate it being this blurry. I didn't know how big the macros were, but the interesting things that stick out to me is, of course, Germany and UK. Not Germany and France want to chart its own course, regardless. But if Trump is
Mhm.
reelected, Sweden wants to chart its own course, as well as Denmark, Austria, and Croatia. The other
Yes.
two that stick out to me is regardless of what happens, Estonia just wants to maintain current levels. Italy wants to maintain current levels, same with Slovenia. But um, and but the other two that stick out to me are the Czech Republic and Hungary, where under Biden, over on the left map, you can see they want to strengthen security ties. Under Trump, they're fine just maintaining the way they are. Now,
Hmm.
Czech Republic, less so surprising, but Hungary, I'm thinking, because Trump, at least in rhetoric, has taken a less hawkish position towards Russia, Hungary feels more comfortable going east, cooperating with Russia and China, as we've seen. But I do think under a more hawkish administration on Russia, Hungary would exploit that. They would exploit saying, we're a bordering country, we're at risk of invasion. Remember the Soviet occupation, and milk that sort of aid. Now, would they go that far? But I think it goes back to Orban's tightrope act, where he sees more opportunity for an Eastern European country to extract more resources from the United States under a more anti-Russian administration, which again, admittedly makes sense. But with these other countries that have even taken a good direction socially, such as Poland, such as Romania, such as Bulgaria, they want to strengthen it regardless. And as you were saying, under Biden, there will be an explicit push for liberalism, for the LGBTQIA, for all these other things within these Eastern European countries, within the EU.
Yes, yes. Uh, Hungary is kind of the only country for me, anyways, that I can see. I'm looking at the same maps you are. I brought them up. It's the only one that I can see that. Well, same with Czech Republic. They're kind of doing the opposite of what I would expect them to do. So that's interesting. Maybe there's a perception in those countries that Biden is going to be lenient overall. I don't know. Like, is that might be a possibility, and that Trump can just offer more. So why not take advantage of it? But interestingly, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria are and Greece are committed to as much American ties as possible. We'll take whatever you got.
And one last thing I will say about this is these are projections from an American institution rather than the stated policies of these countries. They haven't come out right and said that, but
Yeah.
this is what they would be assumed to do in the event when Trump is president, or if the second map says if Trump is not president, which again heavily implies Biden. And you have Austria as another one. Austria would strengthen under a Biden or non Trump administration, but disengage under a Trump administration, which is interesting considering the fact they also have um, a lot of elements of populism in their government. And that also brings into question how much of this is decisions by heads of state, heads of government, versus how much of this is decisions by bureaucratic institutions such as foreign ministries and state departments, etc.
Hmm. Right, and it does seem the countries, especially like Sweden and Finland, are also definitely signaling that under Trump we would take. Basically, it's saying that with Biden in office, we would probably have more goals in common. So with him not in office, we'd have to chart our own course. So there is a perception of kind of cooperativeness, even leniency, if we're going to be a bit more cynical about it. But yeah, so to get back, I guess, to the original point, last night wasn't a confidence-inspiring event, and we, like I say, we might see another debate, but how is it going to be moderated? Because I don't even know if it can, or if it, because obviously there would be anger that would ensue afterwards, right? I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, I can't either. And again, I think the biggest takeaway from these maps right here and from the debates overall is that, the countries that pack the most punch within Europe are the ones most interested in disengaging and finding their own way in the world, whether that be their own power block, whether that be cooperation with China, and I'd say less likely Russia. But yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone at home, abroad, regardless of ideology, whether they're on the left, on the right, liberal, conservative, reactionary, communist, whatever, came away feeling positively about this debates. Unless you were explicitly going in looking for something to point and laugh at and make fun and say, look at how crazy it is. But in terms of American leadership, both at home and abroad, I don't think anyone came away feeling better.
Yeah, yeah, and then you notice in other quarterlies like International Politik Quarterly, which is like a German Euro German foreign affairs quarterly. It has very strong Atlanticist ties, and the cover is Trump, waving from a plane, and his hair is all disheveled. He looks ridiculous, and so on. That's their fall issue. The messaging is very strong, right? We don't want him anymore. We cannot afford him as the image of what ostensibly is Western civilization. So in some ways, it is kind of Moldbugian. It is something like the Spangel has pointed out as well, that the elite and the American client states are essentially left wing Americans who are going to commiserate with left wing Americans in America proper about how horrible Trump is, and really how they're better than America, for the same reasons that an American liberal would say, essentially. There's a match between these two types of people that is like 80 to 90%.
Yeah,
So
at the end of the day, a lot of
um,
the liberal criticisms from Europe, from Canada, of the United States pretty much boil down to we're better Americans than the actual Americans themselves.
right,
And that's also a
right,
common thing
exactly.
you see among the uh, high class immigrants, for example, a lot of people coming over from India. So it's a very common mindset that their anti Americanism is so entrenched within the current system that they have to portray it as, well, you know what? We're actually better at being you than you are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, and this has been going on for quite a while, mind you, right? In the 60s and 70s, it was the French telling the Americans, "Oh my God, you're so sexually conservative," and all of this. It was that kind of snobbery, or it'll be food snobbery. It'll be one thing or another, and Americans. I mean, witness Starbucks, right? Like that whole thing is about well-educated Americans traveling abroad to Europe and discovering certain things, certain nice things about Europe, and then bring some of that back, for the to raise the peasant class, as it were. And so that's been going on for many a decade, and especially, and I would say the big change, I would the big uptick in that for me was post World War II. However, it was going on even longer. Just witness the amount of American authors that moved to Europe, um, because it was culturally richer and whatnot. I mean, we shouldn't forget. I mean, America is more like Rome. It's not. It's a nation of engineers and wonder workers with machines. No, it's not. It's not really a great, like, artistic and cultural um, mecca, as it were. Mixed metaphors all over the place. But
Yeah, I mean, it's
um,
a country founded by Anglos and up until recently predominantly occupied with people of Anglo and German descent. Of course, it's going to be a more industrious country rather than a more cultural country.
right, right, because just imagine the people who moved here. Like, there weren't poets and playwrights. There weren't people that were already well established and well entrenched in English society, right? And England does have a very rich history of artistic expression. We just have to all you have to do is mention Shakespeare, uh, to say nothing of Milton and Wordsworth. Is countless poets, Gainsborough, all kinds of great painters, Turner. Um, so, anyways, it is more like Rome and much less like Greece. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and also I
So
think the other big point on that is still a much younger nation that I would say to this day never really found its footing in terms of its identity, and that's also another thing to consider why infatuations with the foreign cultures, whether that be from a left wing perspective, especially like in the 70s, 80s. glorifying France, or even the conservative sort of Anglophilia for when it comes to even like legal traditions and cultural traditions, thinking about rule of law and following legal tradition, and even down to that kind of stuff. So they're seeking, I would say, even to this day, outside influences to see, well, how do we build our nation? Because they forget this nation is if you want to be the most generous possible, goes back to the early 1600s with the early English colonies.
Yeah. Yeah, some of it really was a pilgrimage. Some of it really was to escape persecution. Some of it was just flat out opportunism. And yeah, and there's all of those elements that are alive today. So, anyways, overall, the debate, wasn't I, was kind of tiresome to watch. However, I do have to say there's something about when Trump is at these debates that he really does channel his supporters. Like there's a far greater degree of sincerity that I think people have to acknowledge. I don't think he's acting. I think he's wishy washy. I think he forgets very quickly. I think but there is, let's say, a narcissistic element in him that he does enjoy channeling those people. Um, so yeah, he was annoyed and annoying last night, but at the same time, he kind of reflected the way a lot of Americans feel right now, and they have no words to express what they've witnessed. People can talk about the riots in '68, and they can make comparisons to the LA riots, but these are going much longer, and they're not stopping. And
Not to
I
mention
think
the explicit support of a lot of
yes,
institutions, because of course the '68 riots, there was tacit support, there was inaction, but we have corporations coming out. I mean, every corporation talked about how much Black Lives Matter meant and fighting racism. The entire month of June was dedicated to that, to the point where it overtook Pride Month. So that's the kind of situation
that's.
we were looking at.
I mean, it took over Pride Month, as you say. My God, but in the West, it's a big deal. So, and I think that's the other dynamic in this is the frustration that there's a coordinated effort between the media and and the protesters and basically the intelligence community, the corporations, kind of delicately working with one another to push this narrative. And there were a few moments where he I don't know if he actually said fake news, but he did mention that the media hates me, and the media is always going to push this angle, right? And I think most of his supporters agree that is the case. I think people who are even too cynical to vote acknowledge that, or people who just don't want. I mean, I have a friend. I mean, of course, it's up here in Canada, so he's not going to vote. But his position is, I can't take it anymore. I can't take listening to the division, listening to just how crazy everything is all the time. I just want things to go back to normal. I know all this blank that you're telling me. I get it. CNN is crap. They're liars, but I can't take it anymore. So they're worn out, and that's also kind of the way the protests are working. They're there to wear people out. So, anyways, I think Trump picks up on this, and people feel reflected. You can tell like when they see him powerless up there, and it feels like they're siding against him. Although, as we mentioned earlier, it's a little bit on his side too. Like, I mean, he's a little responsible for that as well. Uh, they completely identify with that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that they do. And honestly, exhausting is really the only word I can put to this, and to the point where not only exhausting, like, oh, it's such a pain to watch this, to the point where it's like, um, just exhaustion from the system as a whole. I think people have largely given up on it. And honestly, I know you've said, and I tend to agree, it's hard to compare America to Rome, to the British Empire, to the Soviet Union because it's such an aberration in and of itself. But
Yeah.
I feel like any other Republican system under this kind of strain would have outright turned into an autocracy or a dictatorship or an empire at this point.
Yeah, and the reason America can't, because of basically the importance, the primal importance of the notion of the individual, right? And that's really what sets the West from, apart from every other civilization, is how it gravitates, how this is basically its understanding of itself is about the individual. Now, I mean, we're
Especially
witnessing.
in late post World War One, World War Two Western civilization, where the
Mhm.
Anglo-American establishment won the day over the Germans, and arguably to an extent, how much you want to consider them Western civilization or not, the Russians, and of course the ideas of the French, where it's been an Anglo-American dominated world for the past century, and like, not that those other cultures didn't value individualism and these sort of things to a degree, but you want to talk about who values it most and where it's like held as an apex value, it's by the English, the British, and the Americans.
Yes, and I think an interesting point maybe to bring up, now that we're talking about World War II, is that both the Soviets and the Nazis were depicted as, I mean, they called the Germans Huns in both World War One and Two. It was a way to diminish the kind of contributions that they made to Western civilization. And in fact, we have to accept that they basically, the Germanics, rather than just the Germans, are responsible for Western civilization. Uh, it's been basically their project, but Germany represents the West at a much earlier stage, and all that sign language that they once had was eroded by liberalism. And it is kind of interesting how Germany had to be depicted as something outside of the West, right? Easy to do with Russia, but harder to convince with Germany. And yes, so after World War II, yes, liberalism and the development of the individual kept going. But what happened was we reached the next stage of the development of the